Hi everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight for our special Q&A session with Phil Harding from Wessex Archaeology to celebrate St Aldham's Day. Now, Phil, welcome and thanks for joining us.
Well, my pleasure. I'm sorry that I can't actually be in Malmesbury myself, but I guess it's not by means of an apology. It's more a statement of regret, really. But we're all in this together, and I hope that whatever happens in the next, I don't know, 30 minutes, an hour, or something like that, anybody listening to it will enjoy it. And the main thing is stay safe.
Absolutely, wise words. And we've had a list of questions from the good people of Malmesbury to pose to you for you to answer and give us a bit of an insight into your experience as an archaeologist, but also a bit about Malmesbury and the history of Malmesbury as well. So let's dive right in if you're ready.
Ready when you are.
Great. So this one is just a bit of an introductory one. How and why did you become an archaeologist, and what got you interested in archaeology itself?
An absolute classic, eh?
Yeah.
And I wish I had a £5 note for every time I've been asked this, answered it. And it's the easiest one on God's earth to answer. The simple, very, very short answer is I was born to be an archaeologist. Um, if I think people assume that I went to some site and had this sort of road to Damascus point where there was this beam of light that came down from the heavens and struck me and said, "You're going to be an archaeologist." It wasn't like that at all. I mean, that's why I'm here. That's why I'm here. I am here to be an archaeologist. I've always been an archaeologist. And there ain't no point in trying to be sort of academic or a scholarship about it or something like that. Just accept it, Phil. That's what I do.
Yeah.
That's what I'm. That's what I've always been. That's what I was preordained to be. That's what I will always be. And then, well, yeah, I should be a dead archaeologist one day, but you bet your life on it. I shall always be an archaeologist.
And
I mean,
is
it's
there a
great. It's great because the point of it is, I've never had to challenge it. I've never had to worry and sort of think, am I doing my life the wrong way or should I do something else? I can't control it. In here, there is some sort of little microchip or something like that, which is preordained for me to be an archaeologist. And I don't want to switch that chip off yet.
Yeah, and if there were people watching that had that same kind of um gift and realization, do you think could you give them any advice about how maybe to get into it, or a route to take?
No, I mean, I think you've gotta follow your heart really. And I mean, let's be honest. When I started out on being an archaeologist, you couldn't be an archaeologist. Everybody tried to put me off being an archaeologist. And I was advised I couldn't be an archaeologist and I would never be an archaeologist. You bet your life on it. My old mother hated the idea of me being an archaeologist. Philip, I always call it Philip. Mothers always do. And she said, you can't spend your entire life grubbing around in dirty little holes. And I said, well, luckily enough, I dug my heels in, and it was a little bit of me that started to come out as a rebellious streak, and I dug my heels in, and that's it. And you know, I was I was persistent. I was bloody minded about it, and I kept going at it. And I tell you something else, I was too hard working. You know, nothing comes to you easy. You have to keep going at it. And that's what I did. And in the early days it wasn't easy being an archaeologist. I mean, you couldn't, like I say, you couldn't be, you were just a digger.
Mhm.
Now, of course, there's university courses that enable people to be archaeologists. There are organisations like Wessex Archaeology, which employ professional archaeologists. There is a career structure that allows you to be an archaeologist. That was never available when I was being an archaeologist or trying to
Yeah.
be.
Amazing. So you've seen the kind of the rise in the whole kind of career structure of it.
I've got a lovely little graph which shows the rise in the profession,
Yeah.
and when I can chart my own career against that graph, and I know that when I kicked along, or when I started off, it was what, like the graph I describe as being a bottom feeder, because the line was just bobbling along the bottom. And that, I think, well, that's when I went on my first dig, 1966,
Wow.
the year we won the World Cup, the year, and so that's over 50 years, and I haven't missed a year yet doing some digging. I'm a bit behind this year because of the Bally virus, but one of these fine days I should get out there and just do a little bit of digging somewhere so that I can tick the box, so that I haven't
Yeah.
broken my chain of consistency.
Yeah, maybe even in Malmesbury. Who knows? So do you have a particular period in history that you love, or
I'm a prehistorian, and I always have been, and always will be. I suppose from that point of view, I don't know whether it's living in Wiltshire, but I mean, with all due respect to Malmesbury and its abbey and all the rest of it, Wiltshire is known for two particular monuments, Avebury and Stonehenge. And if anybody says, "Where do you live?" and you say, "Oh, I live in Salisbury," and they scratch their head because they don't quite know where Salisbury is, and you go, "Oh, it's down the road from Stonehenge." Ah,
Mm,
then they know where Stonehenge is. And they're in a county in the country that can hold a candle to the prehistory that we got here. We got some wonderful, wonderful monuments. And I mean, within that, of course, everything I've always done. I mean, everybody knows I'm a fanatical supporter of. I love stone tools. I love flint tools. And when I was a kid, I went briefly through the dinosaur passion, because everybody loves dinosaurs. You see, you're smiling, you gotta love dinosaurs. But once I actually got into, well, I didn't know what archaeology was when I was into that sort of thing. I mean, it was just a long time ago. But I
mm,
think it was that kind of remoteness, that business of cavemen. It was
mm,
always a cavemen, that did things. They were, and they still, of course, are our ancestors. Of course, they don't live in caves because we're a bit short on caves in Wiltshire and what have you. But it was always that remoteness. And I
mm,
think really that's kind of all encapsulates that idea of where did we come from? Where are our ancestors? Where are our roots and all the rest of it? And if people said to me, if you had to go anywhere on the globe, where would you go to dig? Usually, I mean, I'm quite happy to stay here and dig, but if I went somewhere else abroad, it'd probably be to the Rift Valley of Africa, because that is the cradle of humanity. Those are where our earliest ancestors came from. That's where the earliest stone tools are all coming from. And that is kind of just going back so far into time.
mm.
And everything else has progressed from there. So, yeah, I love prehistory. But don't get me wrong, and please don't get me wrong, I'm an archaeologist. That's what drives me. So if it's good archaeology, I don't care whether it's prehistoric archaeology, Saxon archaeology, medieval archaeology, post medieval archaeology, or even Roman archaeology.
Oh my
You know,
goodness.
no, and in brush of breath. If it's good archaeology, then I'm interested in it.
Okay, brilliant. And do you have a favorite site that's, I'm assuming it's going to be a prehistoric site that you've worked on?
Yeah, funnily enough, and that's strange, really, because always everybody wants to know what your favourite site is. And here am I with over 50 years of sites to choose from. And I suppose in a funny sort of way, the one that really still, I love it to bits, was funnily enough pretty much the last dig I ever did.
Mm.
And that was at Bulford, on the south side of Salisbury Plain. And oh, what a sight! I mean, that ticks all the boxes. Ticks all the boxes for Phil, anyway. It's prehistory. It's on chalk. God's wonderful geology. Um, it's in God's wonderful county of Wiltshire. It's, although I think I said prehistoric, but of course, this also the input that it does to illustrate what we're doing about the Stonehenge, and it's of a period when Stonehenge was just being constructed, 500 years before the big stones come in. Some of the earliest late Neolithic dates in Wiltshire, some of the earliest late Neolithic dates in southern England, comparable dates to the start of the late Neolithic in Orkney. And I was privileged to dig that site. I had to wait over 50 years for that site to come along, but my God, it was worth waiting for.
So what did you find at Bulford?
Oh, it was pits really. We had 50 rubbish pits, and they were just chock a block with late Neolithic pottery, stone tools, of course, um, an amazing array of environmental evidence. I mean, he just, oh, carved chalk. I don't think I'd ever found carved chalk. We got fed up with finding it. You know, it was just, oh, got some more carved chalk. Oh, have you? Stone axes, jigger. I mean, I mean, if you're digging a pit or something like that and it didn't have a stone axe in the bottom of it, you would feel offended. Um, and it was just, oh God, it was just like died and gone to heaven. I mean, if I ever go to heaven, and I probably never will, it'll be a site like Bulford. I just love it. And then of course the radiocarbon dates. Once we started getting the radiocarbon dates, we were getting these dates of about 2,950, something like that. And it was embarrassing to get the dates because they were all exactly the same. You know,
Wow.
you'd expect a bit of leeway or something like that. But these were like, it was like stacking them up like on a pile of coins because they were all exactly the same. And beautifully, they were all painting in about the same time of the Stonehenge. And I know somebody said to me, do you realise, Phil, that the people who were buried, the cremated remains at Stonehenge, the people who were cremated and buried at Stonehenge might have actually visited Bulford?
Yeah.
Stone of Crows, you know, that's something else. And that, eh?
Yeah, amazing.
I know, it just kind of blows your mind. That really does. And it, you know, there it was. It was my site.
Amazing.
Don't get better than that.
Worth waiting for.
Oh God,
So we obviously can't talk to you and not mention Time Team. So how did working on Time Team come about for you?
well, because when they were trying to get a team together, they wanted somebody who was talented, good looking, had charisma, sex appeal. Um, you know, and of course, I had none of those. But what I did have was that ability to work hard. Um, and I mean, it was luckily enough, I knew Mick Aston, bless him.
Mm.
And Mick was working with Tim Taylor, who was it was his brainchild to put Time Team together. And Mick was working with Tim, and they wanted somebody to talk about stone tools. And in fact, it was I remember Wessex Archaeology had an open day, and we were going to sort of throw our doors open to the
Mm.
public. And Phil was kind of commissioned to sit out the back and nap Flints. And I remember somebody turning up and saying, or one of our staff turning up and saying, "Oh, Phil, somebody coming to see you today from the television." And I said, "What's that all about then?" And he said, "I don't know. Just they rung up last night. They're going to come and talk to you today." Oh, well. And we hadn't even kicked off. And I met this woman. She come up the drive and she said, "You must be Phil." "How do you know that then?" And she sat there while I was napping. And I mean, that was kind of, I suppose, the nearest I got to a screen test or something like that. It was kind of, could I do basically what they wanted me to do? Could I talk about Flints? Could I nap Flints? Did I come over all right on the telly? Potentially, I suppose that I must have ticked the boxes. And funnily enough, it was a series called Time Signs, and I think
Okay.
Time Signs is still available on the YouTube and all the rest of it. I tapped into it a little while ago, over 20 odd years ago,
Mm.
and yeah, it would be 20, must be damn near getting on towards 30 years ago, I expect now. And I looked at some of that stuff. I was talking about flint napping and stuff like that. There's actually some quite good stuff in there, surprising. And I think to myself, that ain't too bad. And anyhow, that was for Time Signs, and then Tim was putting Time Team together, and he just invited me to be part of it. So, I mean, I got into it through, well, I suppose through being a flint napper. But
Mm.
actually, when it came down to Time Team, what I actually then, and my role then, tended to be more as an archaeologist, a digger, a trench archaeologist. But I was also involved in a hell of a lot of the reconstruction stuff, because they
Mm.
knew that I always liked that hands-on approach, working with clay or stone or whatever it happened to be. Work with some wonderful, wonderful people and that.
Yeah, amazing. And talking of the people, what was it like to work with Tony Robinson and Mick Aston and Carenza Lewis and all of the others? Do you have
Awful,
any?
awful. Yeah, because they were always wrong and I was always right. No, it was great. I mean, you can't. I suppose it's one of those things. Like I said earlier on, I was born to be an archaeologist. That team was preordained to be put together. I don't think there wasn't a situation where you put in a list of attributes that you wanted people to have, and you kind of shoehorned them in to
Mm.
make a team up. The team just came together, and it was a team, and we did all get on together. I mean, I suppose the thing was that we all had our own specialities.
Mm.
um Carenza came in through it as a landscape archaeologist. Gator, of course, was a geophysicist. Myself, I dug more holes than the rest of them put together. Mick was this overall leader, if you like, with such a wonderful knowledge and all the rest of it. And Tony could put the TV side of things together. So there was never any real conflict. We all had a power base, but and equally, none of us were so big-headed that we thought we were better than anybody else.
Mm.
Um, of course, we had. Well, I suppose you'd have to say we had. No, I wouldn't call it fights. We had disagreements. Of course, we did. But a lot of that disagreement was in terms of the pressure of being there for 3 days and that adrenaline thing that kept going on, and but at the same time being aware that whatever happened, the number one priority was always going to be the archaeology. We knew that you had to put some emphasis into the television side of things, but don't mess with the archaeology,
Yeah.
because I'm an archaeologist. Mick was an archaeologist. Carenza was an archaeologist. John Gator was an archaeologist. Stuart Ainsworth was an archaeologist. We loved archaeology better than everything else. That was, do not compromise the archaeology. And so, of course, like I say, there were disagreements. But I mean, I've always sort of compared it to a sort of like a happily married couple. If I know anything about happily married couples, don't come to me about marriage guidance, folks. I'm not going to be involved with that. But the point of it is that, from what I understand about happily married couples, they always have disagreements, but at the end of the day, they usually kiss and cuddle and make up at the end of it and go, was nothing to get excited about, really, was it? We was arguing about nothing. And effectively, once the old adrenaline had calmed down a little bit and we'd had a few beers or something like that, we kind of kissed and cuddled and made up, and we were just the best of friends again. And, you know, as I've always said, one of the things that underlined for me everything that we did was respect. I respected John Gator's ability with the geophysics like nobody. Now, I never ever would admit that on the telly, but that was why we could have that banter together, because you always tried to do him down and say what he was doing was rubbish. But on the other end, you knew that his power base, his knowledge of geophysics was second to none within our team, and that we were lucky to have him. And so you respected him like hell. But it went beyond that. You respected the cameramen because you knew that they cared as passionately about their camera work as I did about my archaeology. The sound men always cared passionately about getting the best sound that they could so that the viewer could hear what we were saying. And if you turn round and or they turn round and said, can we do that again? Why was that then? Well, I didn't think it was very good or something like that. You never, well, you always said, do we really have to? Useless, so and so, and all the rest of it. But you never object. Well, you beyond that, you always did it again because you respected their opinion and you knew that there was something in there that wasn't quite right for them. When they were happy, you were happy.
Yeah. Sounds like an amazing team effort.
It was his team that, in that one word, no matter about the time bit, the team bit.
So over 20 years of Time Team, do you have from that time a favourite site that you worked on there? Or
That's your
favourite programme?
I think, I mean, you got ones that are just quite special. Sleek Adway is always one that comes to the surface, the fake one. I mean, we went to some wonderful, wonderful places. Going to Mull was a great adventure. A lot of those Scottish islands, just getting there was just wonderful. Sometimes the archaeology just blew you away. When we did the first live one at Turkdene, that expansion of the geophysics, and people would meet in the street and say, "Oh, God, Time Team's going to be. Wonder what more geophysics has got." They'd scuttle off home and put their telly on to see just how much more of that Roman landscape had revealed. But and then there were sometimes when you got people, sometimes when you would be in towns and cities, and people. I remember we went to Burslem up in near Stoke-on-Trent, and people used to queue up around the fence very, very early in the morning. They loved what we were doing. They were just so friendly, such friendly people. And so, you know, I mean, the archaeology was always good. But sometimes different programs have different strengths and different weaknesses and all the rest of it. Sometimes when you had a program where you didn't think you were going to find anything, that was in itself memorable because it was a challenge to kind
Mm.
of, I mean, okay, if there's, I don't think you ever get to a point where there is absolutely nothing. There was one program where it got next to nothing, but as an archaeologist, provided I could explain that nothingness, if you see what I mean, and if
Yeah.
you could see why it wasn't there, or why it was a bit thin, it didn't matter, because you know in archaeology it's not always where things are. In a lot of cases it's where they're not, and
Mm.
you want to know where people have lived and where they've worked and how they've moved around and all that sort of thing. So it's a question of not only where it is, sometimes it's where it's not. Negative evidence.
Mm.
I mean, and people can't get their head around that. You didn't find anything. Ah, that was the good thing about it, you know? And so you always, if somebody, you know, when it came down to it, a lot of times, you know, you'd say, which is your favourite site? The site I'm doing now. Because I always felt that if that wasn't my favourite site at the time, then I wasn't giving 100% to that site. And if I
Mm.
wasn't giving 100% to that site, then I was falling down. And so you always put 100% into whatever you were doing, and then you never got to the next site and said, "Oh, this ain't as good as the last one. That
Mm.
this is now the best site."
That's a great attitude to have. Have you ever dug in Malmesbury?
No, I've been able to avoid that.
But from I know you've visited and you have a bit of knowledge about the town. So if you were to dig in Malmesbury, where would you find the most interesting place to explore from an archaeologist's point of view? Is there a particular feature you would want to excavate?
Well, it's interesting that, and I hold my hands up. I am not an expert on Malmesbury, and so my answers might be slightly weak. Um, what I just recently I've been looking at a site in Warwickshire, Mesolithic site, Middle Stone Age site, sort of 10,000 to 6,000 BC. And I love the Mesolithic, and it's a sort of very much of a period which is underrepresented and all the rest of it. And I looked for the Mesolithic. What do we know about the Mesolithic in Warwickshire? And basically, diddly squat. No, there is no or very little known about it. And because I've been kind of thinking about the Mesolithic, when I knew I was going to be talking about Malmesbury, I thought to myself, bit of Mesolithic and Malmesbury then. So I pulled up a data set to know what there is known about the Mesolithic and Malmesbury, and it's next to nothing. Now, don't tell me the Mesolithic people did not come to Malmesbury. There are Mesolithic flints just down the road. You are very, very close. We're right on the close to the Avon Valley. The Mesolithic people loved their river valleys. There are springs at Malmesbury. Don't tell me these people weren't going there. And you know, in a lot of cases, we don't know because we simply haven't looked. I think that there are just so many, what should we say, hidden treasures that can be that await to be resolved at Malmesbury without concentrating and focusing all the time on the abbey. And I know that's the big thing, and the Saxon, the occupation, the Saxon burr, and all the rest of it. But this is part of Wiltshire. People have been living in this county since the dawn of time. They didn't skirt round Malmesbury and go, I ain't going there. And so I'm sure that there is far, far more hidden treasures in that landscape around Malmesbury, and maybe even at Malmesbury itself, which just await to be discovered. I haven't got a specific target in Malmesbury that I go, oh, I want to go and dig there. I bet you. I mean, yeah, I probably would. I wouldn't mind betting I'd have a toddle down to some of the near the water courses and try and just find out if and what you'd have to look round. You'd have to kind of work out where the favoured places might be. I bet you there's a hell of a lot more there than we really give it credit for.
And what would you be looking for? What might have been those favored places? Is there a particular thing
Well,
that?
I mean, if I was looking for, prehistoric remains, then Flints come into the equation, and of course, Malmesbury not being on the chalk, you can bet your life on it. If you find Flints, they've been brought in, and so there's a good chance that they're going to be artifacts, and that's the easy thing with my team up, or the team up in Warwickshire. They don't actually have to know what work flints look like. All they need to know is what a piece of flint looks like. It's got, because flint doesn't occur in Warwickshire either. It's just on the chalk, so you can bet your life on it. If you've got an area where there's no natural flints, if you've got flints, it's been brought in. There's a good chance that it's been worked by prehistoric people. And in the most recent edition of the Wilts Archaeological magazine, dropped through my door only 2 or 3 days ago, there is a site there in Malmesbury, which was dug by Cotswold Archaeology. They found some Neolithic flints. They say that in the report they got Neolithic flints. Now, those Neolithic flints aren't necessarily in situ. They're not actually where they were dropped. They've been churned around by the ploughing and all the rest of it. But they did not come there by aeroplane. They didn't come there by the last glaciation. Those flints were brought there by people, Neolithic people, or whatever what happened to the date was. It goes to show that people were there. And perhaps a lot of the difficulty is not only because people haven't been looking and perhaps find it difficult to look for this stuff, but also the geology. So much of the preservation of archaeological remains depends on having favourable geology or geological conditions. It's so beneficial if you don't have extensive ploughing. On the site that I was just discussing that Cotswolds dug, there was ridge and furrow, medieval ridge and furrow systems, which had just mullered all the good archaeology, or destroyed a lot of good archaeology. And so all these factors come into it that might actually help to explain why a lot of archaeology is less well preserved on one site than it is on another site.
And you've mentioned the Saxon Burr, and if we move into the kind of Saxon period, what do you think it would have been like for them when they came into the Malmesbury area? What would they have found there?
Well, I imagine that they would have found an agricultural landscape. They're following on from the Roman period. Don't ask me for detail about how much was arable land and how much was stock rearing and all the rest of it. I don't know. There are people out there. There's probably people far better qualified to try and paint that picture actually in Malmesbury itself than I am. But you know, it's not that when the Saxon period or the Saxons came in, they weren't coming into a virgin site. You know, they'd had thousands of years of people living in that area. So what you get is a continuity. You might get a change of, you know, obviously the Romans have gone, the Saxons have arrived, but it didn't just go stop and change. It would have been developing. And, you know, you'd have had communities who'd been living in that area for generations and generations and generations. They didn't just suddenly stop and a new lot come in. They just gradually changed over.
Mm.
And, you know, it doesn't matter where you go of any kind of change of a political system, let's put it like that. The one thing that doesn't change are the people.
Mhm. Yeah, very true. But I mean, there's always an impact though. So what impact would the Saxons have had?
Well, you know, I don't know. I mean, I rather suspect that there would have been, you know, continuity and gradual things. I mean, I imagine that, you know, by the time you got the first setting up of or when the abbey was first established, you, the one thing that Malmesbury would have had that perhaps a lot of other places would have been that centre of learning. So you'd have had educated people, people who would be able to read and write and all the rest of it. Um, but you know, the number of people who would have been at that abbey who have been able to do that, and again, you've got to consider that all the people that were in the local landscape, because the people in the local landscape who were carrying on being farmers and agricultures, that's effectively what they were.
Mm.
Um, you know, they wouldn't have been able to suddenly read and write. They'd have been as illiterate as you know, as they always had been. It takes a lot of time to learn how to read and write. I like to think about ordinary people because I think I am an ordinary person, you know, and even in within Salisbury, let's go to the city that I know. Um, you know, there is currently only one bishop. There is only one Lord Mayor. There is only one of all those, but there are shed loads of ordinary people. And
Mm.
so where you had that little enclave of wisdom and knowledge in the abbey at Malmesbury, around that there would have been an entire population of ordinary people, about like a bit like me and probably a bit like you, just ordinary people just doing their jobs. You know, they might have, well, for them they'd have probably been agricultural. It would have been a rural environment, but they'd have been, you know, stock rearing and producing crops, um, and weaving, perhaps spinning, and all the rest of it, and just getting on with life.
Mm. The drive of Abbey House is roughly, we think, where the medieval tower and the chapels were before they crumbled in the 1500s. I think you've had a look at the results from our geophysical survey that we had done on the Abbey, and I wonder if you could give your thoughts on those.
Well, I mean, I'm not a geophysicist, Matty. That's what it boils down to. You know, if we go back to good old Time Team, wherever, you know, that was where I bumped into to geophysics mostly, and we had John Gator. That's his job, and the folks at Malmesbury have had geophysics done by qualified geophysical team. It's the geophysical team put their conclusions and what have you. Um, like I say, as an archaeologist, as a digger, that's perhaps when I start to come in. But I certainly don't say where to put the trench, and I certainly wouldn't even deign to do that in this instance. What I'm saying is that I think, you know, you asked me my response to that geophysics. What I'd say is try and add something and make the geophysicist's job a lot easier by maybe giving them a bit of hard truth. Here is a wall line. This is exactly what a wall line looks like. The wall is here. A lot of what they're picking up is going to be demolition rubble, you know. And so what you want to be able to do is define exactly where the wall lines are and actually how well preserved they are, and that gives you a lot more scope for interpreting the geophysics. Once you've done those basics, then if you think the potential is there, you can then use that as a springboard to go on and do more work and more work. But you know, when we did Time Team, you'd always start off with a simple question to start with, and then you'd work from a known to an unknown. You didn't go in and go bang, wow, look at that, let's dig there. You'd hang on to that one for maybe day 2. Let's get a trench in on day 1, and let's start getting the basic understanding of what we're looking at in the ground, what the archaeology is really like, how that is showing up on the geophysics. It might be that what the geophysics is picking up is a totally natural feature. You'd want to know that, and then you can go back to the geophysics and go, wow, look at that, there's an anomaly there. Yeah, but we dug the first one, it turned out to be natural. On the other hand, you might say, that's a wall line. Not only is it a wall line, but it's well preserved. The foundations are still there. Okay, that shows that the site is well preserved. And then you move on and you do another trench, perhaps somewhere else, but you use that first trench as a springboard.
And I mean, is there any likelihood that you might come to Malmesbury to dig, or would you like to come to Malmesbury to dig?
Well, the invitation is probably about what should we say, at least 30 or 40 years a bit late. Mainly because I'm old now and I ain't much good. I mean, thank God I wasn't in the same sort of situation, physical condition, when I started. Because if I'd have been in the current physical condition, I'd have never been an archaeologist, because I'd have never been able to do any hard work. So I reckon after about 50 odd years, I've done my hard work, and the body is it holds up, sort
Hmm.
of, but it don't work quite as readily as it used to. And the spirit is willing, but the flesh is definitely weak. So I think the chances of me coming to Malmesbury to dig are fairly remote. Obviously, Time Team has been completed for what, 6 or 7 years now. God, how time flies! But yeah, I'm sure we could have made a good program at Malmesbury, but you never invited us.
But you are still working now, aren't you? And could you give us an idea of what you're working on, or what your latest project is
Well,
about?
you see, now I mean, I'm spending far more time at the computer than ever I used to. Thankfully, although the body doesn't quite work as well as it used to, the old grey matter is still clicking in. That's still, I think there's still a bit of life left in that yet. Um, and I'm doing at the moment is working on Salisbury, and I mean there is a, oh yeah, at least 40 years worth of archaeological research that's been done in the city, and they're all little tiny disconnected bits. And so what we want to try and do, Wessex Archaeology have decided to do, is just to pull all that together and actually tell the story of Salisbury through the archaeology. Can't do it without some reference to history, but just looking in terms of the archaeology. And I mean, I think that's a very sort of salutary lesson to us all, and it can be just applied just as equally to Malmesbury as it does to Salisbury. You know, if people think about Salisbury, all they think about is the cathedral. Who wouldn't? It's our gem. But there's a city there. People have been living there since the 1200s. People have been living in that city. To people in Malmesbury, I would say, don't necessarily focus all the time solely on the abbey. Think about the town itself. Think about the generations of people that have lived their lives in Malmesbury, the occupations that they've done, the ordinary people that have been in Malmesbury. Think about them. And, you know, if they turn around and people say to me, well, we don't know anything about them. No, if you don't know anything about them, damn well go out there and start finding out about them. Get a coordinated test pit strategy together. People can dig test pits in their gardens and all the rest of it and find out what they find. Make sure that you record where all those test pits are so you get a distribution around within the city, within the town. Anchor that in with any other archaeological work that may have been done in the town, and actually think about the story of the town. That's what I'm doing with the story of Salisbury, trying to think about the story of my city, and how that development through the archaeology. And it's been a wonderful opportunity to try and pull all those strands together to actually to make it work. And it applies anywhere you like. Doesn't have to be a big city or a city like Salisbury. Doesn't have to be a town like Malmesbury. It can be a village or a hamlet or a farmstead. If people have been living there, there is a story to tell.
Amazing. Well, that sounds really exciting, Phil, and good luck with that. So I think that's all we've got time for all of the questions we've had. But thank you so much for giving your time today, and it's been great to talk to you. Thank you.
No, well, thank you to folks of Malmesbury, and please enjoy the day, what's left of it, and mainly enjoy Malmesbury.